Radio.
To be completely blunt here, Brian, and there are plans to expand
Indoctrination.
That's right.
Well, Idahoans are also concerned.
Horror shot. That line would be moving a little bit farther west.
I'm like crying.
Nobody wants to see
Dark money is influencing policy in our state.
Well, that's not how this works.
Well, hello there and welcome to Nowhere to Hide. I'm Brian Hyde. Twice a week I sit down and sift through a number of stories in the mainstream media to give you examples of how the media isn't there to so much keep you informed as to make sure that you are following the approved narrative. And we've got some doozies of examples today to share with you that'll show you how it's not so much big, bold lies. It's not like they're telling you, the sun is green or, the moon is made of cheese or something like this. What they're doing is shading and more importantly, massaging the news through the way that it's reported to make it sound as if, well, of course, everybody can see that this is the only way one could possibly view this particular story. Let me give you a case in point. This is from a journalist in air quotes. This is from Morgan Romero at KTVB in Boise. And it's a story she shared from the AP. This is a story. Look at this lead into this to build that sense of urgency. Here we have the woman pictured here. I'm a sixth generation Idahoan. For some reason, that's very important to people these days. I've been here longer than anybody. I want to stay here, but it makes you question whether or not the state will allow you to because we had to flee in order to be safe. When we left for Oregon, we felt like we were criminals. What could she be talking about? Why, you know as well as I do, it could only be abortion. And this is how we move the needle on the abortion issue. By pretending that, oh my goodness, every case is a tragedy. Look at this headline. Hypothetical situations or real-life medical tragedies. A judge weighs an Idaho abortion ban lawsuit. Now, here's how AP reports this. An attorney for Idaho asked a judge on Thursday to throw out a lawsuit seeking clarity about the medical exemptions to the state's broad abortion ban, saying it was based on hypothetical situations rather than current facts. But an attorney for the four women and several physicians who sued says that their claims aren't hypothetical at all, but real-life tragedies happening in doctors' offices and homes across the state. Now, it's helpful if they're specific. Otherwise, it does seem like, well, but somewhere this is happening. And, it's, again, they're largely hypothetical. This is how gun control works, too. Hypothetically, this is going to stop somebody from committing a crime, except it doesn't. Why? Well, because criminals don't obey laws by definition. Nonetheless, the article goes on to tell us that similar lawsuits are playing out around the nation, with some of them, like Idaho's, brought by the Center for Reproductive Rights on behalf of doctors and pregnant people who were pregnant people, really? Pregnant women who were denied access to abortions while facing what they call serious pregnancy complications. By the way, I don't know if you knew this, and maybe this is going to come as a shock, but there are always complications or at least risks associated with pregnancy. Nevertheless, if there was a natural disaster and you were to show up at the hospital because you were in labor and everybody else is, dealing with, horrible injuries from an earthquake or a tornado or something like that, when they triage who's going to get treated versus who isn't, the person who is in labor is probably not going to be immediately admitted because it's not considered a life-threatening condition. In fact, there's risk, but it's also a natural process. So just saying, even the medical community recognizes there are some things that have higher priority when it comes to, how they triage their patients and how they treat them. Nevertheless, let's see how this melodrama plays out when we pretend that this is happening everywhere and this is why this Idaho's abortion law must be struck down. The four women named in the case were all denied abortions in Idaho after learning they were pregnant with fetuses that were unlikely to go to term or survive birth. Okay, so it hadn't happened yet, but it's unlikely or it's a possibility that they could not carry these to term. And they said that the pregnancies put them at risk of serious medical complications. Again, that's true with any pregnancy, but it's also kind of a natural part of life. And the odds are really more in their favor than not. All four traveled to Oregon or Washington for the procedures. Now, we're supposed to draw from this that therefore this is such a widespread problem. Obviously, this has to result in the undoing of Idaho's abortion law, which is simply much too strict for anybody. So since the Center for Reproductive Rights is behind the lawsuit in Idaho and also behind a similar lawsuit in Texas, I want to compare what's going on with an actual Texas case to the way this is being reported by AP on these Idaho plaintiffs who have filed suit along with some physicians to try to get Idaho's abortion law either struck down or at least set aside or find some exemptions. Grayson Quay says, look, the media is lying to you about the Texas abortion case. Here's why. The mom's lawyers haven't cited any risks to her health that aren't normal for pregnancy. She wants an abortion because killing her baby now is less traumatic than carrying it to term. Now you might say, well, Brian, it's her right. That's her body. But there's two innocent lives that we're dealing with here, the mother's as well as the child. So let's not forget, there is another innocent life. Let's dig a little bit deeper into this Texas case. And again, you'll see some similarities here. And I'm just asking you to ask these questions. Are we being told everything by the media regarding this Idaho case? Texas's abortion law has an exception for the life of the mother. This woman doesn't qualify because her life is not in danger. She wants an abortion because her baby may not live long after birth. But in Texas, that is not a legal reason to kill the child. And apparently in Idaho, that's the same thing. So something to keep in mind, but there's more to this. And this is where we really get to the crux of the lawsuit and the crux of the issue here. The lawsuit alleged that due to Texas's strict abortion bans, doctors had told her their hands are tied and she'd have to wait until the fetus dies inside her or carry the pregnancy to term, when she would have to undergo a third C-section only to watch her baby suffer until death. Oh, that sounds terrible. It sounds so unreasonable. And yet there is still, again, more to this not being reported by AP. An individual here posted actually on Twitter or X some of the court documents showing the Center for Reproductive Rights arguments. And this is the summarized, too long, didn't read version. Her doctors won't say her life is in danger because it's not. They've said instead that if her baby dies in utero or makes it to term, they can induce delivery or deliver the child via C-section. Now, Cox, that's the name of the woman who is pursuing this lawsuit in Texas. She doesn't want either of those options. She's had 2 previous C-sections. Her lawyers point to the risk of uterine rupture with induction and the future pregnancy complications that repeat C-sections may present. Now, the person posting this says, I happen to know more than the average person about this particular point. But let's get to the real heart of the matter. Either way, this baby will be delivered. And the choice here is between delivering a whole baby or a dismembered baby. Between holding and loving her or discarding her like medical waste. Between dignity and murder. Do you see the difference here? Of course, the state has an interest in protecting innocent lives, both the life of the mother and the child. So we can have immense compassion for parents who receive devastating diagnoses for their children. But that compassion doesn't need to compel us to advocate for killing innocent human beings. I wonder why we never hear that part of the story reported in the supposedly fair and balanced, news by so-called journalists that are trying to steer that narrative. All we hear is, oh, what an imposition this is. What a tragedy. How horrible. With no concern whatsoever for the little innocent life at stake. Why wouldn't a parent, even if they were faced with that kind of horrible news, want to at least show the love and compassion for that unborn child, letting nature take its course? Now look, if the life of the mother was legitimately in danger, yes, there are exceptions in Idaho law and in Texas law. But according to the doctors in Texas, and apparently here in Idaho, those conditions were not met. And so, like a criminal, we had to go somewhere where it was legal to dismember our child who may or may not be born with some horrible, unsurvivable dilemma or disease. I'm sorry, it may sound harsh, but that's really what the heart of the matter is. Either way, that baby is going to be delivered. Why are we supposed to pretend that somehow it's more noble and it's more compassionate and really more ethical to tear it apart and dispose of it like medical waste? I don't know, something's pretty messed up in that particular way of approaching a bad situation, and one that, is faced by some people, but not all. Why do we pretend that this is the rule rather than the exception? Anyway, let's move on to another topic. This is one that I thought you would find particularly interesting. Last episode, we actually mentioned how Trent Clark let slip a dirty little secret about Idaho's government being built for the politically connected. Wayne Hoffman really fleshed this out, and I think he really gets to the heart of the matter of why do we see some of the current divides here in Idaho politics, and why does it seem like it's between the paid-off politicians versus those who are actually trying to adhere to the proper principles of limited government? I like what he has to say here, and I like how he frames this. Trent Clark, the former chairman of the Idaho Association of Commerce and Industry, or IACI as we call it, and former Monsanto lobbyist, recently said something interesting about the Idaho Freedom Foundation that's worth dissecting. Wayne says his statement is at the heart of today's political discord. Now, what Trent said was he said that there were, I'm trying to remember the exact verbiage, basically the businesses that thrive in our environment, they thrive because of Idaho's political environment, and the businesses that don't thrive are the ones that are hiring IFF basically they spend what he called exorbitant amounts of money to shape policy that will prop up these otherwise failing businesses. Now, Wayne takes him to task pretty good here. He asks, do those senators, the Republican governor, the Republican-controlled House of Representatives, did they pass things like universal education choice? Did they limit the power of labor unions that control the education system? Did they get rid of the income tax or property tax? Did they do anything to control, curtail, or even eliminate a single state agency or button down the welfare system? And the answer is no, of course not. In fact, whatever moves have been made in the last 3 decades to promote conservative values have been dwarfed by rampant growth in government spending and government control over our daily lives. That's the reason why banks like the Idaho Freedom Foundation exist. Now, these corporate interests, on the other hand, exist to, well, let's just say, help with the distribution of taxpayer funds. So here's what Trent Clark wrote. He said, on Facebook, our current government is beholden to businesses that are thriving in this political environment. That would mean with the cronyism that's going on. IFF, on the other hand, is beholden to the very businesses that do not thrive in this environment and therefore are willing to pay handsomely to disrupt the system. Disrupt the system. In other words, by keeping it within its proper bounds. Let's start with the first part of the sentence. Wayne says, our current government refers to the government of the state of Idaho, controlled for almost 30 years by Republicans. During that time, in 2000, Clark was a chairman of the state GOP, a time in which he wrote nostalgically that Republicans occupied 32 of the 35 seats in the state Senate. Now, this is where Wayne was talking about. During that time, did they ever trim the size of government? Did they ever do anything to rein in some of the corporate lobbying or the effects of teachers' unions, for instance, in shaping public education policy? You know as well as I do. The answer is absolutely not. Why? Because that's business, and business is good if you got your hand in the public till. So when Clark says the government is beholden to businesses that are thriving in this political environment, to whom is he referring? In other words, who has benefited from the explosive growth of government? That's a fair question. And it's the IACI types, it's the lobbyists and special interests who know that they can count on their chosen legislators, those that they back, those that they have lobbied for and provided funding for to keep them in power. They can depend on them to be a reliable source of revenue that is extracted from the taxpayers, under the threat of force. Oh, I'm sorry. Does that make you uncomfortable to talk about the fact that your taxes are taken with the threat of you will do this or we will hurt you? But that is the true nature of the system. It's called legal plunder if you ever want to get around to reading an essay by Frederick Bastiat called The Law. Why do we have laws? Why do we have government in the first place? It's not so we can plunder this group so we can pay for that group, but that's what it's become. And it's a perversion of what government was intended to be, which was to protect our natural rights and make sure that justice prevails. So Wayne says the word businesses in Clark's statement is deceptive because businesses include special interest groups and lobbying entities, including those that represent state agencies and local governments. They're the ones that have thrived the most. IACI represents big businesses, including the medical industrial complex, both of which benefited from the near total acquiescence to Obamacare through the implementation of a state-run insurance exchange in 2013 and the expansion of the medical welfare system in 2018. Relieving some businesses of any health insurance obligations they'd otherwise have for their employees. The expansion of the medical welfare system, the biggest driver of government expenses, with Medicaid now being the latest program in all of state government, benefits IACI and its members. Do you see why it's so important that these legislators, these reasonable people, as Jim Jones would refer to them, stay in power? Yes, the current system benefits special interests, big businesses, government agencies, and programs on which each depends. And the programs on which each depends, rather. The special tax breaks and perks and the flow of money from you to them is precisely what's being protected by a government beholden, as Clark puts it, to them. Okay, but what about his claim that, Idaho Freedom Foundation is simply bringing in, what's the term they like to use, dark money? By the way, what does that even mean other than sounding scary? Well, they bring in dark money, not bright money? That must be for evil purposes. Only dark money could be used to do evil deeds. Please, this is mental manipulation, but here's a good meme to kind of sum up what it's like. Idaho conservatives, establishment politicians, selling out to IACI. Why do they sell out? Because IACI provides funding, it provides support, it provides propaganda that seems to support the establishment class and their ability to, again, transfer money from the taxpayers to these special interests. May not be a popular thing to say, but that's exactly how it works. Now, let's talk about IFF. Wayne points out nobody donates to the Idaho Freedom Foundation in order to get a program passed for special tax treatment or even for special consideration by the government. They want the government to stop stealing the money they earn in order to give the ill-gotten proceeds to someone else. They want a government that stops exploiting people and gets back to its core mission, which is to protect our natural rights. They basically just want to be left alone, and they support our work to that end. Now, if you've never worked in the nonprofit sector, I was a development director for a think tank in Utah for some time, and you would be shocked at the number of people who make donations to think tanks like this. And by the way, it's interesting how desperate some of the powers that be are. We want to know who these donors are. Who is it who's supporting the Idaho Freedom Foundation, as if, it's some secretive, smoky room, in a warehouse district somewhere on the far side of town. Nope. It could be anybody from, someone who is a business owner to someone who is who's inherited a lot of family wealth. A lot of family trusts will make philanthropic donations. Sometimes it's just grandma who says, I have money to spend because my lifestyle is much simpler. My things are paid off. And there are things and causes that I support. I don't know why the cause of freedom should be seen as a particularly suspicious one or something nefarious that can only be funded with dark money, but that's the kind of thing they're talking about with dark money. And what does IFF do with that money? They lobby for public policy that keeps government in its lane, period. Hard truth? Well, for some it is, but it is still the truth nonetheless. Wayne Hoffman concludes here by saying, this is what the present political fight is all about. It's a question of direction. Shall the state of Idaho continue to be the vessel through which certain people or entities benefit, or will the state's singular interest be our constitutionally protected rights? Look, that's the whole reason it was called into existence in the first place. Not to benefit this business or that business or to pick winners and losers. As Wayne says, the latter course means everyone thrives, not just the politically connected. That one's going to leave a mark, and it should. And as you see the election year electioneering ramp up, especially for rigged choice voting and also for open primaries, keep in mind, one of the reasons that these interests, including these establishment politicians, want to introduce complexity into what should be an otherwise simple and straightforward system is because they're trying to muddy the water to better hide the connections they have or to better hide the machinations that they engage in to keep their donors happy. But if you stop to ask, is it really in keeping with the proper role of government? This is about keeping power, plain and simple. And they do not like that certain young upstarts have been coming along and holding their feet to the fire and actually calling them out on the budgeting process. I mean, I can't remember who it was. One state legislator actually made the comment, well, if anything passes the Joint Finance Committee, JFAC, if anything passes them, then I assume it's necessary and I will vote for it. Okay, that's not using your head. That's not representing the people that you're supposed to be representing. That's just, you're like a dog. Would you like a treat? Okay, roll over. Good boy. Now vote yes. Anyway, one final thought here, and this is just something to keep in mind with any media that you access, but especially mainstream media. Oh, they are so brave telling us about all the outrages of the day and all the things that we need to be protected from. But this says it well. I have the same opinions as every major TV news channel, newspaper, and social media giant. I have the same opinions as every major corporation. I have the same opinions as the UN and almost every state and local government in the world. I am a rebellious, free-thinking renegade who is impervious to propaganda. I know if you felt a little bit of a sting and maybe you see yourself in that, might be time to step up your efforts to better ascertain the truth for yourself. I'm Brian Hyde, and this is Nowhere to Hide.
Are biased, the Idaho Press Club are biased, all media, newspaper, radio.
To be completely blunt here, Brian, and there are plans to expand
indoctrination.
That's right.
Idahoans are also concerned.
Horror shot.
That line would be moving a little bit farther west.
I'm like crying.
Nobody wants to see
Dark money is influencing policy in our state.
Well, that's not how this works.